Okay, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome. We'll start in 10 seconds, just to leave time for the 400 plus participants registered to join us. And we see numbers are still going up. Thank you for joining. Okay, then I suggest probably we get started now. Excellent. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. My name is Aziza Akmouche. I'm heading at the OECD, the division that deals with cities, urban policy, and sustainable development. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this fourth OECD Roundtable on cities and regions for the SDGs. I will just take you through a few housekeeping arrangements and then hand over the floor to our two keynote speakers for the opening remarks. Just to say that this webinar, as the past ones, is being recorded, that the recording will be made available on our webpage by the end of this week, to invite you all to be as active as you can on the chat. To say hi, where you come from, but also to ask questions that you may have for each of the panelists and the speakers throughout the next 2 hours. We'll have different moments throughout the webinar today to address some of these questions, and also to have a poll or two to take the temperature and seek your feedback on specific items for discussion today. Also to invite you to be active on social media using our Twitter handle, at OECD_local #SDGs, and to feel free, whether you are a panelist, a speaker, or a participant, to share via the chat any link to material that you think would be of interest to the audience at large in relation to today's discussion on how cities and regions are coping with the Sustainable Development Goals in this pandemic and recovery context. I'll just wrap up sharing with you the items of the agenda today. You may recall that in the last roundtable that was held in November, many of us have made a very strong point that the SDGs offer a very clear and stable framework to actually guide local and regional governments in shaping this transformative recovery that we need from COVID-19, and that is the reason why we have devoted today's roundtable to this specific topic, how cities and regions are leveraging the Sustainable Development Goals in their Build Forward Better efforts. We'll have first a number of reports that will be launched that provide a deep dive on how different cities and regions are coping with the SDGs today and using them as a tool to guide public action. Then we'll discuss a joint survey that the OECD and Committee of Regions have carried out recently on the SDGs as a framework for COVID-19 recovery in cities and regions, and we'll have a broader consultation with you all tomorrow in the next edition of the Roundtable on high-level principles on city-to-city partnerships to localize the SDGs that we're shaping for the G20 Presidency of Italy these days, and we'll discuss also the role more specifically of higher education institutes to support local and regional governments in shaping the recovery packages through an SDG lens. So I'll stop here. It's my pleasure now to hand over the floor to Thomas Woben. Thomas is the Director for Legislative Works at the European Committee of the Regions. We're delighted to co-host this roundtable with you, Thomas, and the Committee of the Regions. You have the floor for your opening remarks.
Yes, thank you, Aziza. I hope you can hear me well.
Crystal clear.
Welcome from the Committee of the Region. Dear Deputy Secretary General Vestergaard Knudsen, dear Excellencies, distinguished guests, it's a great pleasure for me to open this kick off this 2 days event on Sustainable Development Goals and recovery, because this is very close to our heart. Just to tell you that as a committee of the region, of course, we are the official assembly of the local regional elected representatives to the European Union. And we feel that in this way, we also representing this level of government to the European Union as a consultative body of the EU. And our members are having an elected mandate. And I'm very happy that Ricardo Rio will speak to you later today to present some of our findings. I'm also delighted to be here and to speak to you, because this is another stepping stone of our cooperation between the OECD and the European Committee of the Regions. We had Lamia last week with us in the Quota Commission. This is, of course, for us a very important topic, also as part of our joint action plan and memorandum of understanding for promoting multi-level governance and local agendas. Since 2015, we have been working side by side with local authorities and regional governments around Europe to localize the Agenda 2030 and promoting it to the EU institutions as a common language and as a key development framework which respects also the local and regional specificities. As we all know, the COVID crisis over the past year and a half have faced local authorities with new challenges, and they were struggling to provide assistance to their citizens and to ease the burden of the economic crisis. And we see that the SDG narrative has lost a bit of visibility in this discussion, and that is of major concern to us. Now that the storm is passing, and we hope that the waves are slowing down, of course, there are the same challenges ahead of us, and we have to work hard together with the OECD to show how the SDGs can play this role in overcoming these challenges. We have the evidence that the pandemic has held efforts back to reach the SDGs by 2030 at global, but also at European level. However, the EU recovery strategy, which we have here in Europe, the so-called Recovery and Resilience Facility, also provides for all levels of government an opportunity to bounce back and to boost investment for green and digital transition, and by doing so also to promote the Sustainable Development Goals. They are the natural framework to accompany these efforts. They are the recipe for sustainable future we are seeking to build. We have recently commissioned a study to analyze the level of integration of the SDGs in the plans for recovery in 8 member states. We are concerned that the findings suggest that the SDGs are not effectively integrated in these plans that we analyzed. Only in some cases we have detected implicit references to the Agenda 2030 with a distinct preference for the economic dimension of the SDGs over the social and environmental one. The limited approach misses the opportunity to take advantage of the SDGs as a whole, as an overarching framework for sustainable development. More importantly, it means that one of the most useful features of the SDG, the policy coherence, is absent, leading to inevitable overlapping with other initiatives set, for example, for cohesion policy and for other investment policies. It also means that these national recovery plans are not going to take into account regions and cities' efforts for a sustainable recovery and for localizing the SDGs. And here, I think, is the moment right now to fix it, because these plans have to still to be implemented. We are honored to co-host this roundtable and to share the commitment to support regional and local governments in their efforts to localize SDGs. Earlier this year, we joined forces to launch a joint study consultation between the COR and the OECD as a survey on SDGs as a framework for recovery in cities and regions. In this survey, we have asked local regional authorities what contributes to the implementation of the SDGs in their constituency, and what kind of policies and strategies they consider relevant to achieve the SDGs in the recovery phase. The aim was to take a snapshot of the situation left by the pandemic on the ground and lay strong foundations for the recovery. This evidence is fundamental to reinforce our political message at EU level and endorse the SDGs as a strategy for recovery. And we understand that OECD means also not only looking at the European part, but also in the global context. And I'm very happy that Ricardo Rio, as the mayor of Braga, will come back to that later in the conference. We will continue to have periodical exchanges with the EU institution, advocating for effective involvement of regions and cities as an essential partner for implementing the recovery plans and for integrating the SDGs as a core objective of a true sustainable recovery. Let me conclude by saying that with the support of the OECD and this community, we can have a positive impact on the European Union to do more and to do better for sustainable development goals. We can also learn from examples outside the EU, which is also another added value of the cooperation we have with the OECD, and which underlines also our global commitment to the Agenda 2030 and to see the sustainable development goal as our joint endeavor, not only for one continent, but for the world as such. And let me thank you again for the OECD to provide this excellent partnership, and we are looking forward to the further discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas Woben, Director for Legislative Works at the European Committee of the Regions, for your opening remarks and for co-hosting this fourth roundtable with us at the OECD. And let me now turn to our second keynote speaker for the opening, the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, Ulrich Vestergaard Knudsen, to launch 3 new reports on a territorial approach to the SDGs. Ulrich, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Aziza, Mr. Woben, Thomas, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends. It really is a pleasure to welcome you to this, the 4th OECD Roundtable on Cities and Regions for the SDGs. And we are, of course, delighted to co-host this with the EU Committee of the Regions. For many years, the Committee of the Regions has been an official observer of the OECD Regional Development Policy Committee, and also an instrumental vehicle to help us connect national, regional and local governments and align their sustainable development strategies and policies. Our latest joint survey on SDGs for long-term COVID-19 recovery strategies in cities and regions, which will be presented later today, really is an excellent example of the benefits of joining forces, tapping into each other's expertise, learning from new ideas and sharing knowledge and resources, just like you mentioned, Thomas, in your opening remarks. And I want to thank you and your team again for the very excellent cooperation that we've had, and I hope we will continue to have on this. For now, today, I'm very delighted, as Aziza said, to launch 3 new OECD reports on territorial approach to SDGs. The first one is from the province of Porto, Argentina. The second one, the city of Kitakyushu in Japan. And the third one from the state of Paraná in Brazil. They are all, and by the way, all non-European, Thomas. They're all outcome of a 2-year multi-stakeholder policy dialogue within each city and region to develop, implement, and monitor strategies to deliver on all SDGs beyond SDG 11 devoted to the sustainable cities and communities. For several years now, the OECD has argued that cities and regions hold critical policy prerogatives that cut across all SDGs. Cities and regions are also responsible for close to 60% of public investment and spending related to sustainable development. COVID-19, of course, has brought unprecedented challenges to sustainable development in both OECD and non-OECD countries, EU, non-EU countries. And in the face of these challenges, the SDGs are probably more relevant than ever. 6 years since the adoption of the SDGs, however, and only 9 years until the end point in 2030, the reality is that no country is on track to achieve all SDGs by 2030. And this is also true at the sub-national level. We have designed a so-called OECD localized indicator framework for the OECDs And it highlights that at least 80% of regions have not achieved the end values in any of the 17 goals, and at least 70% of cities, 70% of cities have not achieved the suggested objectives for 15 out of 17 of the SDGs. So this is why the OECD started conducting policy dialogues with several cities and regions in order to help them understand how they perform, where they need to prioritize, and how they can guide decision-making going forward. So I'd like to highlight three important takeaway messages that have come out of our new reports. First, regions and cities are increasingly using the SDGs as a framework to assess their economic, social, environmental performance, and also to understand their strengths and weaknesses. There are particular SDGs where Cordoba, Kitakyushu, and Piranha actually perform above the average of OECD regions, and let me give you a few examples. Cordoba, for example, is performing very well on gross income inequality, which relates to goal 10 on reduced inequalities. In fact, 24% of the province's population live with a gross income below the relative exclusion line, which is lower than in the large majority of OECD regions where the comparative figure is 87%. On SDG for good health and well-being, another example, Kitakyushu has one of the highest life expectancies across OECD regions. The city has a very solid health infrastructure with a hospital bed rate of close to 200 beds per 10,000 people, again, considerably above the OECD average of 41 beds, 5 times higher, in fact. And Piranha is doing very well vis-a-vis SDG 7 on affordable and clean energy, with 94% of its electricity production coming from renewable sources, well above the 41% of OECD regions. Yet, much remains to be done to meet the SDGs in each of these cities and regions, and I also have a few examples of that. In Cordoba, the achievement of SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities is hindered by increasingly unaffordable housing, for instance, with rents accounting for around 30% of tenant household gross income. In Kitakyushu, the employment rate stands at 50.2% compared to 61.8% as the OECD regional average, and the 57.3% average of Japanese regions. It means that there is still some improvement needed to achieve SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth. And Piranha still needs to catch up with SDG 4 on quality education. We know that 30% of the region's young people between 18 and 24 years old are early leavers from education and training, compared to 17% in OECD regions. So that's almost double the rate. Now, the second message from our 3 new reports I'd like to highlight is that cities and regions not only work to meet the SDGs, they also increasingly use the SDGs as policymaking tools to rethink how to strategize, how to plan, how to invest, how to allocate budget at local and regional levels. Let's look first at Cordoba. The province has mainstreamed the SDGs in its governmental actions as a tool to promote social inclusion and well-being, including prioritizing the provision of affordable housing, addressing the gender gap in unemployment, reducing air pollution, and improving water quality. On the other side of the world, in Kitakyushu, that city was one of the first cities worldwide to publish a voluntary local review in 2018. This helped to shape a vision to foster sustainable development through the transition to low carbon energy production and a circular economy, female empowerment, inclusion of vulnerable groups, and international cooperation. And finally, in Brazil, Piranha uses the SDGs to address territorial disparities. The state has aligned its budgeting tools with the SDGs and is now supporting the 359 municipalities located in Piranha to integrate the SDGs into municipal comprehensive plans to prioritize projects and to better allocate budgets in line with the 2030 agenda. The third and last message I'd like to underline is that cities and regions are leveraging the SDGs to strengthen multi-level governance and stakeholder engagement. Cordoba has created an SDG forum to engage civil society in the design and implementation of the province's 2030 agenda. Kitakyushu was selected by the Japanese government as one of 29 SDGs future cities, and they established a dedicated SDG promotion headquarters. This was done to implement the 2030 agenda in a shared responsibility with territorial stakeholders. That included also private companies, civil society, and universities, as well as the national government. And in Paraná, the state administration is partnering with most of the municipalities within the state to provide financial support and guidelines to help them align municipal planning tools to achieve the 2030 agenda. So to conclude, our 3 new reports provide tailored policy recommendations based on the OECD checklist for localizing the SDGs to help the 3 cities I mentioned design better sustainable development policies at both the local and regional level. I encourage you to take a deep dive into these reports to examine their recommendations in more detail. They are plentiful. So let me congratulate Córdoba, Kitakyushu, and Paraná for their remarkable efforts to localize the SDGs and also for providing a source of inspiration for other local and regional governments to follow that path, like Thomas Wobben mentioned also in his preliminary remarks. I hope that these reports and our recommendations can guide your efforts towards sustainability over the years to come, and we certainly stand ready to support you going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ulrik Knudsen, Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, for launching these 3 reports and conveying this triple message of the SDGs being used as an assessment framework, the SDGs being used as a policy tool, and the SDGs being used as a multi-level governance mechanism. I think the very concrete examples you've provided from these 3 pilot cities and regions that we also thank for opening their books over the past 2 years will be of major inspiration to many other cities around the world. We have put on the chat the links to the 3 reports which you can access for free from the OECD website. Make good use of it, spread the good words, and let's hope this will have a catalyst effect for more cities and regions to embrace that effort. We will now hear very short video testimonies from the leaders of these 3 cities and regions. The time zone made it very difficult to have both Japan and Brazil and Argentina connected today. So we'll go first with a video from Kenji Kitahashi, the mayor of Kitakyushu in Japan. Let's play the video.
Hello everyone, I am Kitahashi Kenji, the mayor of the city of Kitakyushu, Japan. First of all, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to OECD, especially Dr. Aziza Akmosh and Dr. Stefano Marta. Today, I am deeply grateful to launch the Kitakyushu report of A Territorial Approach to the SDGs. It has been a great honor to be invited to this program as a model city, especially only one from Asia, and work closely with OECD since 2018. Kitakyushu has history to overcome the serious pollution with citizens, private sector, and administration. This experience raised the citizens' awareness in the environment and built valuable assets and paved the way for international cooperation. In the Kitakyushu report, many good practices are showcased as the synergy effects of the SDGs. For example, offshore wind power project will reduce carbon dioxide emission, create jobs, and provide learning opportunities. Community restaurants for children program is providing social education, joy for the elderly, and reducing food loss. Such real actions are closely linked to the various goals of the SDGs, linking environment, economy, and society. We will further implement these practices. And thank you very much for the precious recommendations in the report. One of the recommendations is to use our strength in the environment to expand the impact to other areas. Another is to use the SDGs as a framework to enhance the relations with national, regional, and other municipal actors. And other is to use the SDGs Club as a platform to promote the concrete actions and policies with local stakeholders. Kitakyushu just developed the second version of the SDGs Future City Plan, aiming to be a green growth city with true wealth and prosperity, contributing to the world. We are keen to achieve this vision through the SDGs. Kitakyushu also announced the Zero Carbon City in October last year. We will accelerate our actions with all stakeholders by increasing competitiveness of cities and companies to make a good cycle of the environment and economy and to create sustainable and resilient city for everyone. We are determined to pursue our mission as an only model city in Asia to disseminate the local SDGs in and out of the country. I would like to conclude by extending my warm greetings to all contributors of the Kitakyushu report and wish you good health and success of OECD. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kenji Kitashi, Mayor of Kitakyushu, for the huge political support you've provided to this work. It's been fascinating to see how Kitakyushu has progressively transformed from a manufacturing hub to actually a sustainability hub and green city. And I think the SDGs framework was a very good incentive to go the extra mile. We'll now hear from the second beneficiary of these policy dialogues, and we'll turn to Cordoba in Argentina. And I'm delighted to introduce the 3-minute 40 video from Silvina Rivero, who's the Minister for Coordination within the province of Córdoba in Argentina. Silvina, you have the floor.
La provincia de Córdoba entendió los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible y a la Agenda 2030 como una oportunidad de potenciar la gestión, ya que brindan el marco para construir una sociedad más sostenible e inclusiva. Por ello, desde el año 2015 venimos trabajando junto a la OECD, alineando nuestras acciones a los ODS. Partimos de un proceso de adaptación de las metas nacionales a la realidad provincial y priorizamos los objetivos a alcanzar interactuando con diversos grupos de interés de la sociedad cordobesa. Paralelamente, se construyeron indicadores para medir el alcance de las acciones como respuesta a los desafíos globales planteados por la agenda. El informe que hoy estamos presentando y que hemos denominado la territorialización de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible en Córdoba, Argentina, nos proporciona una evaluación de los desafíos y oportunidades junto con una guía de políticas para continuar orientando la visión de desarrollo económico diversificado, promoviendo la inclusión social y el bienestar de las personas. No podemos dejar de mencionar que este último periodo estuvo atravesado por una pandemia que el mundo entero debió enfrentar, obviamente al cual la provincia de Córdoba no fue ajena. Por ello, desde el comienzo de esta crisis, pusimos toda nuestra creatividad, todo nuestro esfuerzo y capacidad para enfrentar la lucha contra un contexto de incertidumbre, en el cual los ODS cobran más importancia que nunca. Hemos mantenido la orientación y el compromiso con la Agenda 2030, dando respuestas en materias de salud, de educación, de seguridad y conectividad, entre otras prioridades. El Gobierno de la provincia de Córdoba utiliza la Agenda 2030 y el proceso de participación de múltiples partes interesadas como un marco para avanzar y fortalecer la gobernanza local y los resultados de nuestras políticas. En ese sentido, debemos destacar que todas nuestras acciones se sustentan en la transversalidad de los tres ejes de gestión: la justicia social, el crecimiento económico sostenible y el fortalecimiento de las instituciones, ejes estratégicos alineados al desarrollo sostenible como parte del desafío global, siendo la reducción de las desigualdades la prioridad de esta gestión de gobierno. De esta manera, desde nuestro modelo cordobés, garantizamos poder trabajar en conjunto con todos los sectores sociales. Estos diálogos y esfuerzos colaborativos aseguran que nuestras decisiones integran a todos y son para todos, persiguiendo la premisa de sumar, incluir y no dejar a nadie atrás. El compromiso de nuestro gobierno es continuar y fortalecer este proceso de participación para consolidar las líneas estratégicas de acción para el logro de los ODS. Entre ellas, mantener la visión del desarrollo económico multidimensional, reducir la vulnerabilidad habitacional, generar trabajo decente para los más excluidos y profundizar el proceso de coordinación y transparencia en la formulación de las políticas públicas. Es nuestra voluntad continuar trabajando junto a OECD en el diseño e implementación de medidas que nos permitan afianzar este modelo de gestión con visión de futuro.
Thank you very much, Silvina Rivero, Minister for Coordination of the Province of Córdoba, and also for the political support of the governor himself, Juan Schiaretti. I have to say this work on localizing the SDGs in the province is enshrined in a long-standing policy dialogue between Córdoba and the OECD, which started almost 6 years ago with a territorial review of Córdoba, followed by a regional well-being analysis, and really impressive to see how you are planning to use and leverage these recommendations to improve public policy in the province. Thank you so much. And let's now switch to the last speaker and pilot representative. And this is Mrs. Kelly Guimaraes, Vice President of the State Council for Economic and Social Development in Paraná, Brazil. We're back with English voice and subtitle, in this case, another 3-minute video, please.
I greet you all and thank the OECD for the opportunity to share our experience in Paraná. I would also like to greet my colleagues from the province of Córdoba and from the city of Kitakyushu, hoping that we yield good results from the program with the OECD. I sympathize with the families of COVID-19 victims in Paraná and around the world. The pandemic revealed the urgency of having resilient societies. We globally share concerns about the future, but the people's lives are being saved in cities. This moment reinforces the global challenges can only be faced with local solutions. Our commitment is to rebuild Paraná even better for the 11.5 million people who live in the state. The performance of our economy, predominantly agro-industrial and with an important export activity, allowed the impacts of the pandemic to be reduced in 2020. Paraná's GDP declined 1.7% compared to a drop of 4.1% in the country as a whole. However, there is still a lot to be done, and the 2030 agenda represents an opportunity to potentialize concrete impacts on people's lives. We have been working hard on the implementation of this agenda in the state, through the Paraná Keeping an Eye on the SDGs strategy. We kept financing our city's infrastructure, which did not decline during the pandemic period. We launched the Paraná Productive Program, highlighting the government's best initiatives for social and economic recovery, and we aligned these actions with the SDGs to identify possibilities for transversal action and policy coherence. The partnership with the OECD makes clear the main challenges Paraná face and reveals great potential. We do have conditions to promote sustainable development. We have a network of state universities with impact projects in these areas where they are located. We have the engagement of the productive sector, civil society, and the courts of justice and accounts. And we continue to bring together important national actors committed to regional development. With the recommendation of the OECD, we work on an action plan that expands the involvement of all stakeholders, converging efforts for the better recovery of the state. I am proud to announce that Paraná was the first pilot to join the second phase of the OECD program, which means that we will be counting on the support for the implementation of the action plan, so that we can extend this model of support to each of our 399 municipalities. We know the Paraná we want in the future, and we are working now to get there.
Thank you very much, Kelly Guimaraes, Vice President of Paraná's Council for Economic and Social Development, and for the big support you've provided, and also the commitment to engage in follow-up work and make these recommendations happen. Thank you to the 3 pilot cities and regions, and equally important to the local teams in each of these cities and regions that have really done fantastic work to help us collect the data, build the consensus, shape the recommendations, and we're delighted to hear from your respective leaders. The reports are not ending on a shelf, but will be fruitfully used to guide decision making in the future. And also to conclude on this part, saying that these 3 reports actually add to the 5 reports on a territorial approach to the SDGs that have already been released. The team will put the links in a minute for you if you wish to access them. We've done similar work in Flanders, in Belgium, in Bonn, in Germany, Viken, Norway, southern Denmark, and Kópavogur in Iceland, and those are still highly relevant and timely for today's conversations around the recovery. With this, we close the opening. We're not doing so bad with the timing, 3-4 minutes delayed, but we'll catch up shortly. And before we get to the panel discussion and hear first from the keynote speaker, I would like us maybe to take the temperature of the audience and to enter in a first Zoom poll. And you will see the poll appear in the screen, and time to hear from you as you can see it on the screen. And here is the question. How has the COVID-19 pandemic affected your work on the SDGs? You can tick multiple boxes. We heard earlier from Thomas from the Committee of the Regions, the shifting priorities, the concerns, the worry that this is maybe appearing as a much longer term concern now that we have shifted to crisis management. You have different options. First, a set of beliefs that the SDGs have helped you take a more holistic approach to recovery. That's the positive side of the coin. Second, there are fewer financial resources and staff resources to work on the SDGs. Third, there is less political support to the SDGs because we are in this context of crisis management. And fourth, the COVID-19 pandemic has not affected your work. I see we have a good half of the 200 plus, almost 250 participants online who have voted. Maybe we'll keep going for 10 seconds maximum. So now is your time if you wish to input. And maybe if we have a quorum now, I see numbers are stabilizing. Let's share the results. And the good piece of news indeed, the vast majority, 60% of the audience that voted today say the SDGs are actually helping them take a more holistic approach, and only a small fraction says it has not affected the pandemic, the work on the SDGs, which means that it did affect the majority of you working in this field, and 30% considering there is less political support these days, and also a good 22% flagging shifting priorities and related resources issues. That's very useful. Thank you very much. And with this, I would like now us to turn to 10-minute presentation that will be made by Mrs. Paula Deda, who is the Director of Forest, Land and Housing Division at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, known as UNECE, a presentation that will look at the SDGs for long-term recovery strategies, and we'll stop sharing on our side the slide with your picture, Paula, so that you can start sharing your presentation. Please go ahead, you have 10 minutes.
Okay, let me try to share the screen now, which is my most difficult achievement for the day. Is coming, right?
So what we see now is the screen, so maybe try putting on diapo mode.
Yeah, I am. Yes, we should be able to do it now.
Now is good. You have the floor, please.
Okay, now let me start from the beginning. Well, thank you very, very much, first of all, for inviting me here. And I really believe this meeting comes very timely because the importance of DSG to localize actually development is essential also in our work. I will touch upon briefly on what we do in EC, which I realize is very much complementary to also what you guys do, OECD, and very similar also in the approach. Now, first of all, the way we are looking now at the implementation of SDGs at the local level is through what we call the key performance indicators, KPIs, for smart sustainable cities. These are 91 indicators, which we have used already for a number of cities. You can see them listed there. And we are using now to measure the temperature of the implementation of SDGs in several cities. The ones we are doing now through cooperation projects are, for instance, Almaty, Bishkek, Tbilisi, Podgorica, but we already have, for instance, Nur Sultan and Norwegian cities and other cities around our region. This is essential because these guidelines, these KPIs have also helped us creating some guidelines for voluntary local reviews, and I will touch upon this a bit later. After all, you know very well that the first step is really the reporting, and is how we are able as cities to report on what we are doing on SDGs is very similar to what governments do with the voluntary national reviews. Now we have the voluntary local reviews for cities of medium or large size. Let me move to the next one. Now, you asked me also specific on the COVID-19 recovery. Well, we realized, I think all of us that are dealing with cities, how much cities were on the forefront of the battle to COVID, but also how quickly they were able to identify solutions and address emergencies. This has also immediately translated in projects to look at the most vulnerable parts of cities and issues in cities that needed to be addressed. As far as EC is concerned, we realized that those that were really left behind when it came to the recovery were informal settlements. Informal settlements, you know very well, cannot offer the same also housing facilities that other cities have offered to their citizens, without forgetting that homes were and are still now, I mean, until everybody gets vaccinated, one of the main solutions, right? Lockdown and being at home was one of the main solutions to the pandemic. So we have a project in this regard. It's called Post-COVID-19 Recovery Action Plan for Informal Settlements in the UNECE region. And it was really the development of an action plan that not only the cities we are looking at, and you see on the screen, but also any other city that has informal settlements can use to address the recovery, economic, environmental, and of course also physical recovery. We talk about building back better, and we were also say, well, is a recovery. Very often it's really also building, how we build the city in a better way. And another project is building urban economic resilience during and after COVID in cities. This is a sort of experimental project of 16 cities all around the world. And we share it with other economic commissions, economic and social commissions around the world. For our region, we are looking at Bishkek, Kharkiv in Ukraine and Tirana in Albania, but there are many more cities also around the world that might be of interest to you to see how we are planning this economic recovery in cities. I was mentioning again, how we are trying to localize the SDG through the development of guidelines for SDG voluntary local reviews. There are several guidance out there for VLRs, but in our case, it's very much focused on these 91 KPIs. And for those of you that are interested to see how it works and how we develop city profiles based on these 91 KPIs, I will have some barcodes at the, URLs at the end of my presentation. I found it very interesting how we were able really to create it, and this was a long process, identifying these 91 indicators that now are really at the basis of voluntary local reviews. They require a lot of data from the city, so this is the main challenge for some cities, of course, availability and access to data, but this is also an exercise to look for them and identify them. Some cities require technical assistance for that, other cities would not need that and would be a relatively easier exercise. Is an evidence-based approach also to planning, and we stress it's flexible and adaptable because very often cities, as I mentioned, might not have all the 91 indicators ready available, but can start using what they have to get the first picture of what is the situation in their city. And very important is also a strong focus on innovative financing we have, because the KPIs also lead to identify the areas that would need specific financing for projects and for improving. Now, when it comes to SDGs, in particular SDGs 11, but many others, and as I mentioned earlier, the issue of housing is also crucial. In this regard, we are developing together with UN Habitat and Housing Europe a very, very detailed study looking at the housing situation in the region. You see there the objective of the study: explore housing affordability challenges and existing policy instruments, especially stressing which ones have been working and are likely to work. Facilitate the exchange and dissemination of this good practices, also identify the needs of policymakers. Now, very often we are criticized that, okay, we produce a lot of reports, but what about action? Is this coming with something attached to it? It was just a picture of the situation. Well, it was actually decided that this was the basis for an action plan that will be endorsed by ministers in October during a ministerial meeting. And this is really the active part of the study, and looking at governance, land policy, finance and funding, and climate neutral housing. And for each of these areas, we really have is a menu of possible actions and tools that cities can use. Of course, we don't expect cities to apply every single action. It's rather a thick document, but I think it's quite inspirational also to explain, based on the study that provides best practices on what are the options the city have to make these ideas actionable and solve at least partially the problem of housing affordability. I still have 2 minutes, so let me get to the next one. Specifically also on many of the concepts related to SDGs, as you know, is also the zero waste and circular cities. This is SDG 12, right? Consumption and production patterns, a very important study and guide we have developed together with 16 other UN agencies, and it was issued last year, is the Guide for Circular Cities, containing practical examples on how you assess circularity, prioritize and determine which actions you need to make your city circular, catalyzing circularity, and assessing the projected circularity impact. It's for those of you that are interested in circular cities and circularity, is a very easy guide with checklists, so that we want to be as practical as possible. If you are a mayor, you have a checklist to go through and see how you can do that. And now let me end with my favorite topic, which is the Forum of Mayors, because this, as you might have heard in the past, this is the actually first first forum dedicated to mayors within the UN, where mayors speak on their own behalf as part of the Committee on Housing, Land Management, Urban Development, Housing and Land Management, but is really the forum for mayors. The next one will take place the beginning of October, 4th and 5th of October 2022. And you see there the logo that was designed by Mr. Foster, the Lord Foster, the architect. I think that image, and I'll close on this, really summarizes the whole concept of the world that becomes a city with the colors of SDGs. And this is what we are trying to do. The forum will be held back to back with the Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, and we will be looking at how cities in the region have been implementing SDGs at the local level. So it's an invitation to come and really listen from mayors themselves, as we have done actually in 2020, listening to their stories about how they approach actually the pandemic. And this is for those of you that are interested in knowing more. I think if you use your phone or you look simply at the URL, you will have more information. I think I exhausted my 10 minutes, but I'm ready for any questions you might have. Thank you
very much, Paula Deda, the Director for Forest, Land and Housing Division within UNECE. I let you stop sharing your screen now.
Yes.
So that we can see you for the Q&A, and also to let all the participants online know that we will upload the PowerPoint presentations that will be showcased today, so you'll have access to the details right after the meeting alongside with the recording. There are a few questions that have popped in, Paula, and maybe I'll try to merge some of them for your consideration. There are actually two questions that relate to indicators. The first one is asking whether you have an idea of the share of those 91 key performance indicators that were affected by the pandemic, and in the sense that the performance, let's say, of cities and regions you're looking at has been hindered or not by the pandemic. Maybe it's too early to say, but the second related question is whether you think we need a new set of indicators that actually take into account the pandemic, whether this localization of the SDGs data effort that has been going on for for a few years now needs to be passes or not, let's say, the COVID-19 test. So I'll let you address these two, and then there's a question that is specific to food systems, which I'll come back to. And if others have questions, please do drop them on the chat. We'll take a good 5 minutes now, Paula, for you to go through them. So please go ahead on these two first.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, it's interesting. Indicators have been affected already. Well, we saw that the indicators, of course, could change where those dedicated to health, and in particular, for instance, the response of emergency vehicles to a call, right? This is one of the indicators of sustainability and smartness of the city. The shortest response period, the better, obviously, and that has been likely to be affected, as well as other health indicators, capacity of hospitals, number of doctors per patient, that we know we were in the middle of the pandemic, so the whole chunk of indicators changed. The other indicators did not necessarily change, but probably we saw an increase of attention to those that are looking at nature-based solutions in cities. With that shift, we really felt, not only from indicators, from the request of cities to us, from the request of our governments, a need to address greening the cities, nature-based solutions. Now, do we need a new set of indicators after the pandemic? You know, this is one of my headaches, and it's indicators, because every time we get to a set of indicators, something happens, or a new organization comes up, or another organization comes up with another set of indicators, or we get requests to update some indicators. And we actually were requested to update our 91 indicators to reflect, for instance, the changes related to the pandemic. Now, whether it's good or bad, I let my member states tell me, because my opinion is that we keep changing them. We never have the same pictures that we can compare. when we have these 91 indicators and we measure them on different cities, it's very interesting. We even get a visual out of the application of those. I don't have an image here, but you'll see it's like a flower with different, with 91 petals. They're green or red or yellow and longer or shorter. And it's like a snapshot. The moment you start changing some indicators, the same flower doesn't have the same meaning. You know what I mean? Visually, you will get different feedback. So probably we have to do it. And I believe that member states want us to update it. What my only recommendation would be not to change them too much so that we cannot then make data comparable or compare across cities and across regions, which is always very important, by the way.
Thank you very much, Paula. Spot on, and actually I couldn't agree more to the observation you make that it's not about more data and more indicators. Maybe we'll put Annalise on mute. Yes, good. But more about using data and indicators as an actual means to an end and making sure that it's fulfilling the function. Maybe you take very briefly that second question on sustainable food systems. You did mention the circular economy. You put an emphasis on waste, and we know that circular economy is not just waste. It's about the radical transformation of how we live, we consume, we produce. And there's a question around increasing attention being paid to sustainable food systems as a logical framework that can actually help link and operationalize several, if not most, of the SDGs. And we know we're being active on that front as OECD as well. There's a sustainable food system summit coming, and that will probably give more traction to this reflection. Anything around sustainable food systems that has come out of your work in UNECE you'd like to emphasize in a minute, and then we shift to the next item?
Thank you. Yes, well, briefly, you will see actually a video will come out from us for the summit. We thought that the best way was really to produce a short video that explains the relevance of sustainable food systems for cities, in cities, and also outside cities. And it's all interconnected for us. Also, you saw in my title there is also forest. For us, for instance, it's very clear that one of the reasons for deforestation is agriculture. So how do we make that more sustainable for forest and for cities, and how we make sure that food is produced in the city but is also not wasted? So we will have we will work on this from a communication perspective, but we also have a food unit in UNECE which is looking into that, and for instance has launched an interesting app that is called Feed App at UN. And you might check it out. And this really puts in touch producers with large, sellers, let's say, not the consumer, not individual consumer, so that if around the city there are production waste or overproduction, is not wasted, but is properly distributed among those that link to the app. You might check it also, that is on our website. And I think that's also, by the way, digitalization is one of these aspects that will help us solve a lot of these problems, including food waste in cities and also proper local production, agricultural production.
Very good. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Paula.
Thank you so much for having me.
There are a few questions maybe that the OECD Secretariat can address on how non-OECD countries can join this roundtable, whether efforts for localizing the SDGs should only come from local governments, but can also come from other stakeholders. There are a few questions on cross-border being captured or not within the metrics. We had endless conversations around that when we shaped the SDGs data set for cities and regions at the OECD, and a few other questions on cities in Africa and so on, that maybe Stefano, I leave this in your good hands to cover, and continue to invite all of you to drop your questions in the chat. And with great pleasure now we are turning to the next item of the agenda, which is the deep dive in the joint survey that we have carried out as OECD with the EU Committee of the Regions on the SDGs for long-term recovery strategies in cities and regions. And we'll have the pleasure now to hear from Ricardo Rio, Mayor of Braga, but also rapporteur on the SDGs for the Committee of Regions. Mayor, thank you very much for being with us and for being a great advocate to keep the momentum of local and regional governments regarding the SDGs. You have the floor to take us through some of the findings of the survey in about 10 minutes. This is certainly not doing justice to the work, but we'll have a full policy paper jointly produced with the Committee of the Regions in the coming weeks. Mayor, you have the floor.
Good morning, Aziza, and thank you for the invitation. Also to Stefano Marta, with whom we have been collaborating a lot. Greetings to Thomas Woben and to the Deputy Secretary General of OECD, to all the panelists and all the representatives from cities all around the world. Dear participants, I am the Mayor of Braga, as Aziza mentioned, the third most important city of Portugal, and I am very involved at European level, both as member of the European Committee of the Regions and member of the Executive Committee of the Eurocities. And I also greet Annalisa Boni, which will join us in a couple of minutes. I'm also member of the Daily Board of the Global Parliament of Mayors and a proud champion mayor for inclusive growth of OECD. So this is a pleasure to be here as a member both of the Committee of the Regions, but also as a representative in a sense of OECD, and to present a work that was a result of direct collaboration with these two institutions. As member of the committee, I have been appointed rapporteur to elaborate an opinion on SDGs, which will be discussed in the present week with EU decision makers, and this opinion will be adopted. Its elaboration process already gave me an overview of the implementation of SDGs in the EU. I have been working with a wide range of stakeholders and EU officials. I have also been working closely with the OECD on our survey and on SDGs and recovery to back up the political messages of my opinion. First, I would like to give you a short overview of the implementation of SDGs in the EU, at least on my perspective. As Thomas Woben just said when opening the event, the SDGs almost disappeared from the EU narrative. This is all the more striking as in parallel, the commitment of local and regional authorities on SDGs kept increasing. And we see many more cities developing specific local voluntary assessments of their fulfillment of the goals. At the EU level, there is no overarching strategy on SDGs. There is no effective mainstreaming or coordination of SDGs in the European Commission's internal governance. And actually, the latest EU policy document on SDGs is a staff working document listing different EU initiatives, one after the other, and labeling them all as SDGs as post. This is far from ensuring policy coherence and SDGs mainstreaming in policies, which we believe it's crucial in any context and much more in the recovery process that we are developing right now. Likewise, the systematic involvement of stakeholders in SDGs policy making had an abrupt stop when the mandate of the EU multi-stakeholders platform on SDGs was not renewed. Actually, I would also like to mention a very interesting comment that I just read from Ine Battens in the chat when she mentioned the link between the SDGs and the European semester and the recovery and resilience funds, and actually the national recovery and resilience plans, which is also mentioned in my opinion. But I don't want to show a picture that is too dark. I had excellent exchanges with the European Commission at top level on the need to better link recovery and SDGs. And this is why I have been invited to speak later today at the Brussels Economic Forum, alongside with many responsibles like the President of the Commission and Angela Merkel. And I also had a fruitful collaboration with the Council of EU, who represents the EU countries, and I am working with the European Parliament as well. I will continue to exchange and reach out to the EU institutions to put back the SDGs at the heart of the EU policymaking and highlight the importance of the SDGs localization process, which is all about the theme of this conversation today. The OECD program and our survey findings will be obviously a tremendous help in this endeavor, and they provide credibility to my political recommendations. And that's why, without further ado, I will now share the preliminary results of our OECD Committee of the Regions surveys, which clearly show that local and regional authorities are well engaged in a sustainable recovery based on SDGs. And I will ask to go into the slides, and this is the first one, which presents the, let's say, the organization of this survey. Sorry, I just had. Here you can see that the objective of the survey was to identify challenges faced by local and regional authorities during the pandemic and understand how the SDGs can support them in the COVID-19 recovery. The survey was run from 10 May until 18 June 2021, we received 145 replies. We analyzed 86 replies, which are exclusively from local and regional authorities. If we move to the next slide, you can see that an overwhelming majority of respondents is working on SDGs and using indicators and measurement systems to track progress and awareness raising campaigns, which are the actions most widely adopted by local and regional authorities. Actually, more than 40% of respondents have either used one of the two or even both of these initiatives. In slide 3, the next one, please. The survey results taught us that political leadership at the local and regional level is considered as the most important success factor for SDGs implementation in cities and regions, with 38% of our respondents mentioning that this is clearly the biggest contributor to the success of the SDGs, clearly above all the other items that were posed in the survey. Next slide. Contrary to what one may think, and actually we had an overview of this perspective in the previous question that Aziza placed in the break, 60% of local and regional authorities believe that the COVID-19 pandemic has led to more conviction that the SDGs can help take a more holistic approach to recovery. And this is a key finding to advocate for the SDGs to be more prominent in the EU recovery effort. Some conservative stances argue that SDGs are a framework from the past, but on the contrary, they have never been so relevant as today. Next slide. According to 40% of the respondents, they mentioned that they have been using the SDGs before the pandemic and now started to use them to address the recovery, while 44% have not used them before, but are planning to do so to recover from COVID-19. Next slide. Here we can also see that SDGs are described as a universal agenda with economic, social, environmental, and governance dimensions. And the social dimension, which is here referred in several topics, is seen as the biggest challenge from post-COVID. Questions like the people dimension, the prosperity, are obviously the biggest issues in the response to this question, which are the biggest challenges ahead. Next slide, please. We have also asked some specific questions on concrete SDGs, and this is not the right place to detail these replies. They will be analyzed and presented during the European Week of Regions and Cities, organized jointly by the Committee of the Regions and the European Commission in October. And the OECD will also draft a dedicated report, which will be launched end of November at the OECD Regional Development Policy Committee Working Party on Urban Policy later this year. In the meantime, however, here are a couple of illustrative findings. For instance, on the SDG 3 related to health, digital health solutions are considered the top priority. Moreover, for around half of local and regional authorities, the decrease of pollution or the promotion of healthy lifestyles are the top priority, as it is shown in this graphic. In the next graphic, we can see the questions of mobility, and here the transport related to SDG 11 on sustainable cities. We can see that around half of the respondents consider the improvement of multimodal transport, such as active and clean urban mobility with public transport, proximity and walkability, as main contributor to sustainable mobility and accessibility. And finally, if we move to the final slide, to help strengthening citizens' trust in their governments and to achieve SDG 16, respondents consider engaging citizens and territorial stakeholders in local and regional policy making as the most effective tool, with around 41% of the respondents picking this opportunity. Altogether, as you may see in the detailed data that will be accessible, this data is invaluable to help local and regional government work better in delivering a sustainable recovery. It is also invaluable to help show that SDGs are still very much on our agenda, that SDGs and recovery can and go and should go hand in hand. And this is also a big opportunity for all policymakers to come back stronger from this crisis, and myself, together with the OECD, will actively advocate for it at the EU level. I thank you for your attention, and I'm available to any question or comment.
Thank you very much, Ricardo Rio, Mayor of Braga and Rapporteur for the EU Committee of the Regions of the SDGs at large and this survey in particular. Let me invite, maybe we'll take a few 4 or 5 minutes for some questions and invite the participants, reminding you all that this is a webinar format. If you are attendee, you cannot take the floor nor raise your hands to drop questions you may have on the chat. And maybe I have a first question with for you, Mayor, if you allow me. You've shown that the picture is not dark, and we see in the survey actually that a big chunk of the survey respondents do stress that the SDGs are helping them drive this holistic framework for recovery. Many of the findings that come, even if preliminary, from the survey are quite aligned with the paradigm shifts that we see happening in cities, you know, this transition to accessibility, the potential of digital, the need to renew this social contract and trust with citizens. And you would think that the SDGs as the pandemic somehow would magnify the potential of these solutions. So you see a picture that is not completely dark. You see appetite, politically speaking, but maybe building on your own experience today, would you say that this is what you're facing as mayor, that we need to keep the SDGs as a long-term framework, and you manage to do this in your daily job as a mayor of Braga, or there's some tweak to do in the language or in the way we leverage this framework given the pressing crisis-related emergencies that you have to deal with on a daily basis? How do you reconcile this long, short term and continue to keep, you know, this as a roadmap when you have so many hot potatoes to deal with?
I think that one of the biggest challenges is to show that when we are talking about SDGs, we are not talking about abstract issues that only concern the United Nations or the European Union or the national governments, but are things that impact in the daily life of citizens. And we all look as local and regional authorities to provide the best quality of life possible to our citizens. When we are talking some of the issues that were mentioned here, the quality of health, the well-being of the citizens, the diminishment of the pollution, the finding of transport solutions, we are talking about daily issues in the management of a city. And the biggest threat is obviously, or the opportunity in a sense, is that we need to mobilize all the actors, including the common citizen, to the pursuit of these goals. And if we can do so, if we can establish like this connection, civil connection, not only between the public authorities, but also with all the stakeholders locally, we can also identify areas in which we can develop specific initiatives that will lead to the achievement of the goals. And that is also why it is very important to monitorize and to make a concrete commitment to accountability, to show the development of our achievement of the goals. And for instance, here in Braga, we are pioneers with some universities to develop an annual report on the SDGs. And now we also produce our own sustainability report every single year.
Yes, indeed. And there's a comment on the chat on the great work that the University of Minho in Braga has done to bring the SDGs into higher attention. So not a compliance agenda only, not an additional agenda actually, but a common language to fix very concrete problems that you would have to fix anyway in the short, medium and long term. Thank you very much. Many comments saying how much they enjoyed the presentation, noted the political leadership. How has trust in political leadership improved or decreased because of COVID-19 related measures? Maybe mayors, that goes a bit beyond the survey, but if you see the SDGs as a way to restore that trust, we know all the barometers and data we've been producing at the OECD show that there is a much higher level of trust of citizens in local leadership than there is in national government and their capacity to ensure their well-being. How do you see this trust evolution in your own local leadership experience, and anything you wish to comment on that? And then we shift to the panel.
Well, I think it's uncontroversial that the pandemic was the enforcement of the link and the trust of the citizens in the local authorities, because we were the forefront of the replies. No matter the efforts of the national governments, of the national institutions, if it wasn't for the direct and more immediate replies from the local authorities in all areas. So we are talking not only about raising awareness to the pandemic or restrictive measures, we are talking about providing health solutions in testing or vaccination. We are talking about supporting education and digital education with the supply of equipment for the schools. We are talking about providing individual protection equipment to social institutions or to common citizens. And in all the areas, it was crucial, the role of local authorities. And I think that that really strengthened the confidence of common citizens in the local authorities.
Very good. Thank you very much. And a lot going on in the chat. Feel free to react alongside colleagues from the Committee of the Regions and the OECD Secretariat to some of the specific questions therein asked. And let me now turn to the panel to actually discuss some of the takeaways that have come out of the survey and link that to the specific challenges and good practices that you have in your different cities or within your institutions. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first panel member, Antoine Neumann, from the city of Strasbourg in France, that will shortly join the pool of pilot cities and regions for this work on a territorial approach to the SDGs. Antoine, your delegation as councillor comprises issues of agriculture and food security, and we've seen how the city of Strasbourg has been quite advanced on the localization of the SDGs. If you can elaborate a bit on what you've been doing recently as part of your recovery strategy, and in particular this new pact for local and sustainable economy that you're pushing forward. Each of the panelists will have 3 minutes. I'll try to be making us all stick to time so that we can take a few questions from the audience. Please drop questions in the chat for any of the panelists. We'll take some in between the two rounds. Antoine. So we are not hearing you, Antoine. If you're taking the floor now, maybe you need to unmute yourself and switch your video on. There's no sound, no image. So maybe while the team is helping me fix the connection of Antoine, let's turn to our next panelist, and my pleasure to introduce Åsa Bjering, project manager for international relations in the city of Helsingborg in Sweden. It was very important for us to get insights from a mid-sized city. And interestingly, we've seen how Helsingborg has been developing this voluntary local review. Paula said a few words about that earlier. If you can maybe, Åsa, say a few words about the process and how you're linking this to the COVID-19 recovery. And then we'll get back to you, Antoine, if you've recovered the sound. Åsa, please.
Well, thank you. Yes, in Sweden, we say we are a mid-sized city, but globally, to some extent, we are quite small. We're one of the smallest, not the smallest though, that has handed in our voluntary local review. And we did that only last week. You should be able to find it there. Otherwise, I will send a link again when I have stopped talking. We decided to do a voluntary local review because Sweden was doing their voluntary national review. We have processes already ongoing. Our long-term ambition is based in the SDGs. A very heavy welfare and innovation initiative is based on the SDGs and the challenges that we feel we can't solve alone, where we are actually reaching out to civil society, to academia, to businesses, to a large extent, working on the challenges that we feel this is what we have in the city. We can't do it fast enough, can't do it good enough. We don't have the thinking of how to do it. So in that sense, we have a very strong action-oriented work on the SDGs. And it relates back actually to a governing strategy which we call the Life Quality Program. And the Life Quality Program, to some extent, has been our way of viewing the SDGs. And it was adopted already in 2016, a bit too early to really be able to utilize the framework of the SDGs as a whole. So we decided that we will do a retake on our life quality program, link the indicators that we already have started working on with some academia and researchers on how we measure life quality in a local setting with the ongoing frameworks of local. And it's in our idea and thinking that let's jump into it. And this was before, to some extent, I mean, for us, the SDGs have been very vivid and present, also before COVID. It would be a lie to say anything else. What we can see, though, is the areas where we made good progress and where we felt that we are a very environmental progressive city. This will continue in the good pace that we have, whilst where we are more challenged, which is to a large extent the inequalities. So it's not depending on that you live in our city, it's in which part of the city that you live in, that we have the large inequalities. We are aware that our data is not in depth enough on this, so that is also something that we are working on right now. But we can see that this is also, we can see this in the overall national review of Sweden as well. And we have a very strong Swedish, we have a very strong Helsingborg, focus on leaving no one behind. And what has happened due to the pandemic is that we have left more people behind. So in that sense, again, you use a report, you use this governing model of voluntary local reports in order to actually prioritize and make focuses. And I would say that is happening right now in the governance system of Helsingborg, both when it comes to what the political system is governing, but also what kind of data are we providing for other stakeholders in order to take action. So in that sense, I would say we are to a large extent using the SDGs as a framework in our recovery work. We are also using the SDGs in our action towards climate neutrality, towards the Green Deal, towards the EU policy. We are utilizing the SDGs more than what I see from my counterpart in the region, that is to some extent following the EU cohesion policy. It's more in the DNA in the city governance system that it is in the regional governance system, because the regional governance system comes more clearly top down from Brussels in that sense. So I think that we are very, very, very much favoring talking about not only smart specialization, but sustainable smart specialization. Again, there's a mission that we are on here, and we will never ever implement the SDGs in pace in time unless we focus our partnerships and focus our work on this. And again, echoing, this is my last thing as I know, echoing what we have seen in the different reports, this demands multi-level governance. The cities are where much of the action happens, but we need the support and frame system of our governments, of our regions, and of course of the European Union.
Thank you very much, Åsa. Very interesting to see the national conducive framework that is in place, with the VNR actually triggering appetite for you to carry out a voluntary local review, but also the more long-standing journey towards sustainability rooted more in a quality of life discussion that turned into a sustainable development discussion more recently. I think this gives a good perspective of the journey. Let me try back, Antoine from Strasbourg, maybe if you can unmute yourself. Good, welcome. You have the floor, sir. And I'll ask all of you to stick to 3 minutes for the first round so that we can have a second round and take some questions in between. Antoine, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the technical delay. So first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation to participate in this roundtable, as well as the OECD, on behalf of Jeanne Barzéguian, the mayor of Strasbourg, who could not attend the meeting. So the city of Strasbourg, as well as the gathering of its 32 surrounding municipalities, have been involved in the localization of the SDGs since 2018. And it appeared to our political team, which has recently taken office, that the SDGs are an excellent tool for implementing our commitments. It will enable us to jointly take into account three major emergencies: climate, social justice, and democracy, which are important for us. Since our election, we have embarked on a transformation movement to address these three challenges. This goal will only be achieved by mobilizing all of the territorial stakeholders, which is not the case today. This is why, with my colleague Anne-Marie Jean, the Vice President in charge of the economy, we started with the economic sector. It was a decision with which we carried out a wide consultation and have just finalized a pact for a local and sustainable economy. The COVID pandemic has confirmed our already strong fears in view of the climate emergency. This crisis has made visible the necessary limits of the human activity with regards to the respect for the biosphere and the nature to which we belong. The rapid spread of the virus around the world has also highlighted our interdependencies. And now it's clear for everyone that no part of the globe is immune to the consequences of the ongoing and accelerating disruptions. So when this interdependence is too important, it weakens us. We saw it at the start of the pandemic for simple but unusual supplies such as masks, but we are also seeing today for supplies of raw materials, wood, steel, rare metal, etc., and the cost of which seem to be soaring. So there's an urgent need to relocate and rethink our sovereignty and our ability to protect our citizens. Our pact, the economic pact, sets out our commitment to synchronize and amplify local ecological, social and digital transition and responsible corporate actions. It brings together key players to drive the transition towards a development model benefiting the entire local economic fabric and businesses of all sizes. At the same time, it preserves and improves the environment and health of all. In this perspective, the role of municipalities is essential. It materializes in particular through public procurement. Our purchasing strategy, contained in what we call the schema for socially and ecologically responsible purchasing, has just been reviewed in light of these commitments and aligned with the SDG framework. So the city of Strasbourg really wants to be exemplary on this point. Voilà.
Thank you so much, Antoine. We'll get back to you to dive into the food dimension, given this is your portfolio in the city, but very interesting to see how you are leveraging public procurement as a tool to actually mainstream this sustainability criteria in the purchasing, but also the broader decision-making that the city is planning to do, and also to hear more about the black box of the pact that you have come up with in the follow-up of the elections to align the planets and connect the dots with different constituencies towards that vision. We'll come back to that. Thank you very much. And let me now turn to our third speaker. We are delighted to have Kirsten Korte with us from the Rhine-Neckar Metropolitan Region. She's the Managing Director of the Rhine-Neckar Metropolitan Region. Kirsten, if you can take us through some of the discussions you've been having on aligning the SDGs and COVID-19 recovery in your metro region recently, what have been some of the challenges, but also some of the opportunities that the pandemic provided to connect the two sets of visions. Kirsten, you have the floor.
Thank you, Aziza, and thank you also for having me here and giving us the floor to explain a little bit about the metropolitan region Rhine-Neckar. And as Asa already mentioned, that Helsingborg maybe is not big compared to other ones. Also, our region only has 2.4 million inhabitants, so we are relatively small compared to other regions or cities, but what makes us maybe special, and let me just point out this in the beginning before answering your question, is that we, in the southwest of Germany, just to give you an idea, because we have some international guests here, and the interesting part is that we have in our region 15 urban and rural districts from 3 federal states. So that's kind of a little special in our context, and also as an organization, we take over the regional planning and development for this region as an organization. And the organization is a multi-level governance model of a private partnership model, so to speak, of a Verband Region Rhein-Neckar, which is a regional association, and an NGO, which I'm heading of, and also a limited organization for the metro region. And so we all work together. And what is special also is that we work 15 years already since metropolitan region is existing. We work very strongly together with businesses, with science, with the administration, as well as the civil society together. And some of you already mentioned this, that we have to cope and to work together with all partners in a region, in the city. And yeah, just to answer your question, there are a lot of I would say projects and funding programs for the restart after COVID from the federal government, and also for the 3 federal states for our region. But now it's the point, and to bring them all together. And what we have done also as a region is that we have regional development concept, actually an innovation strategy, what we have developed jointly together with our partners in the region. And so from various sectors, we worked on the strategy, implementing a mixture of lighthouse projects and broad strategic implementations. And so the focus on this strategy is green tech, social economy, and digital economy, as well as biotech. So you can see there, all of them have the sustainability in that, but we have now to, I would say, focus them also to the SDGs. SDGs are a framework, and a good framework. And I think now the opportunity and all the challenge is, I would say, to bring them all together. So then number of projects and action plans, but now our challenge is to bring them together. And we just started, we have fresh new member in this group. So we just have our interviews with all the different sectors to get an idea what they are doing. So this is our opportunity also to implement the SDGs also for the recovery. And where we have definitely to get better is in monitoring. And that's why we are part of this project, because we would strongly believe that this is something what we need for our future. And I think there's a lot of going on, but now we really just put them into action, and also to make it visible also for the citizens, so that they get an idea that it's not just a high level idea, so that it helps us all to live in our world. So, and also for Rhein-Neckar, we do a lot, and we also adapt existing programs after COVID to rethink. No, we all know about new work and new mobility and all those things. So I would say there's no stone on the others. We don't turn them and to see how we can adjust them. So we are very delighted to be on this trip right now, I would say, and to use the OECD program also for us to renew, I would say, our strategy as well.
Thank you very much, Kirsten, and welcome again to the program. And this will be valuable insights from this transformation agenda you're starting now to connect the 2 strategies and to consider synergies. Let me close this first round with Annalisa Boni, our friend, Secretary General from Eurocities. Annalisa, you and your team have been doing really amazing job to collect what cities have been doing in response to the pandemic. And my question to you is more, what are some of the takeaways from these policy responses that you've been tracking and learning from, and to which extent do they have the SDGs, and how do you see the synergies between recovery and long-term sustainable development? Maybe I'll let you turn on your camera.
I have a problem with my tablet.
Oh, okay, so then we'll do without the camera. We'll use the picture.
You can see my hand. I'm so sorry.
That's
I
good.
just have a new tablet, and
No problem.
with all the platforms and not Zoom. So if you can just
switch off the camera, and you have the floor, Annalisa. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. So that a lot of has already been said, but I mean, for sure that many cities have adopted the SDGs as an explicit framework to drive sustainable urban development already before the pandemic. Yeah, we've heard that, and that's what you said. That's why Eurocities, set up a task force, did surveys, because there were a lot, and there are still a lot of cities really interested to do that, to use that framework in more pushed ways and in less pushed ways, but for the reasons that Ricardo mentioned, and yourself, it's a common language. It's a single framework of actions that can ensure that all the policies that contribute in a coherent and integrated way to fight poverty, improve well-being, respect environment, and so on. So this transversal and systemic and integrated approach is really the key word here. And that, what Ricardo said, means really how you actually, for a mayor, you daily manage a city. And then it's an approach that is about, innovative governance and open governance and so on. And that's what, again, Ricardo said, it's the connection with people and stakeholders. So you need it as a city. It's an approach that can help demonstrate that results can be achieved to people. So the reviews and monitoring. And it's also good for cities that want to influence global governance, because at the end of the day, no one really thinks that, there are these global phenomena like climate change, migration, and so on, but then they have to be, they happen, and they have to be dealt with at the local level. So just to say that basically now with the pandemic and all the sort of devastating damages, it is even more essential to think of a sustainable approach, and an approach that is the one of the SDGs. And so those cities that have an SDG strategy, like a localized SDG strategy, and we're already making use of synergies, integrated approach, citizens engagement, are now better positioned, in my view, to use this capacity for sustainable and inclusive recovery. So that's the link. And the Green Deal, the next generation new investments, the SDGs as a bigger framework, make, this moment as a totally unique window of opportunity to address all the challenges that cities are facing in this systemic way, in this integrated way, and therefore having a direct impact on the quality of life of people. And that's the final goal. So for me, the nexus between sustainable development, post-COVID recovery, quality of life is the real long-term goal. And the link between the Green Deal and the SDGs, it's huge, because in a way the Green Deal is our European path to SDGs, and the Green Deal can really be inspired by the SDGs. And that's why at the moment we are about to launch a campaign that is called Mayor's Alliance for the European Green Deal, which will leverage win-win city visions where different dimensions of sustainable development come together. And this will really reinforce the link between the SDGs and the Green Deal. So everything is connected and needs to be aligned politically, operationally, strategically, and so on. But I can develop that a bit later with some examples, maybe in the second round if needed.
Thank you so much, Annalisa Boni, Secretary General of Eurocities. I think the point you made about better preparedness of those that had already embraced that SDGs localization agenda is extremely spot on, but also as an accelerator for those that maybe didn't jump into that boat in the past, but have seen it more recently as a concrete way to solve very concrete issues that have emerged or let's say been amplified with this pandemic. There are a few questions or points in the chat on transportation, accessibility, air pollution, housing affordability, and so on that I think are really at the core of some of the goals. So we'll go for a second round. I'll ask you to be even sharper than you've been. Thank you for helping me stick with time. And maybe we'll start with you again, Antoine, going back to the food component of your portfolio. And we had conversations earlier around this as well, and maybe asking you how, from the perspective of the city of Strasbourg, you see the food policy in the broader strategy on the localization of the SDGs and the importance for COVID-19 recovery. In your first introduction, actually, you made a point about relocation and rethinking the positioning of cities in global value chains and supply chains, and probably this food conversation contributes to that. So maybe 2 minutes from your side, Antoine, from the city of Strasbourg.
2 minutes will be short, huh? But the question of food is of utmost importance. And when we took office, this question remained fragmented between several city departments, and there was no holistic vision nor coordination. So we decided to make this weakness lever for transformation, both ecological but also social and democratic. Our approach is based on the framework proposed by the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, which is founded on the SDGs. It's not a question of cherry picking from the 17 goals. On the contrary, we try to reconsider all the impacts of the food question for citizens, for companies, but also for the common goods, such as water, soil, air, and biodiversity. Maybe I can give a couple of examples. First one, we obtained unprecedented fundings in the agreement we just signed recently with our regional water protection agency. These subsidies will help us to support farmers, local farmers with land located around catchment fields in moving towards non-polluting practices and therefore protecting our water resources. And at the same time, we are thus opening up two possibilities. First is increasing the share of nourishing production that is really lacking on the territory, and also creating new sectors which will be future solutions for Strasbourg. And by doing that, we will touch many SDGs, 2, 3, 6, 11, for example. Another example, quickly, we just won a national call for projects called Quartier Fertile, Fertile Neighborhoods, which aims to develop urban agriculture projects on several sites inside the city. These sites are located in very unprivileged neighborhoods and will be developed with and for the benefits of the residents. We want to fully involve the population in this project so that they become places at the same time for learning, gardening, but also for accessing work opportunities, raising awareness of healthy food through educational support, etc., etc. These projects will be also an opportunity to nurture links between citizens and to bring them closer to nature. And then again, we will be influencing a few SDGs, 1, 2, 3, 10, 12, etc. And by making these neighborhoods engines of ecological transition, we also offer residents a revalued and dynamic image of their living environment. And this impact will at the same time be shared across the city, and all the citizens of the Strasbourg will benefit from it. So I would like to conclude by emphasizing the importance of carrying this message of transformation at the European level, which was already said before. I share the will of the Mayor of Braga to make the SDGs a decision-making tool within the framework of the European semester. For example, Strasbourg was invited to share its experience during the consultation that Mayor Ricardo Rio carried out for the Committee of the Regions. And I would like to re-insist on the essential appropriation of this framework by members of the European Parliament so that they can promote it to their fellow citizens and national executives. So it is essential that the local level be fully considered as an actor of the transformation. In this sense, the Mayor of Strasbourg supports the declaration of the Mayor of Florence, who calls for an island of mayors for the implementation of the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antoine. Very interesting to see how you're using the food hook basically to have a connection, linkage to many of the SDGs, given the multidimensional nature of the spillovers that come from food security. And you gave some very concrete tips on how you can combine goals that sometimes may look contradictory, food security and water preservation being one very good example of it. And I think the types of contracts you're developing with farmers to reduce pollution, as it has been done in other places in the past, is very inspiring in this buying local transition. Thank you very much. Let me now turn back to you, Osa. And we've heard a lot about Helsingborg being smart city, and I would like to ask you maybe how you connect this digital smart city agenda of your municipality with the SDGs and the recovery plans you have in the pipeline.
Well, for us, it's not being a smart city. We are a smart, sustainable, and inclusive city. We use the technology, of course, in order to enhance the quality of life for the people living in the city. The innovation that we push forward and that we look for is innovation that we can count home in the life quality of the people living in our city, and ensuring that we reach the very high set ambition of doing this within the planetary boundaries. So that is directly linked to the SDGs. 2 years ago, we put aside 25 million euros, 25 million euros earmarked only for innovation, because once again, a broad majority, a political majority in the city said, we can't solve this by ourselves. We have today more than 60 businesses that we have a new form of private partnership with. IKEA, for example, entering with more than a 10 million investment. And this is a small city when IKEA is entering with that. And they look upon, if we just only look upon what they are doing, they are looking upon the future of the affordable home, the future of food and togetherness in the home, the future of health, sustainability, and well-being in the home, and the future of shopping in the home. You hear, it's the IKEA, it's the home. But however, they need to connect this with the community, and it's the first time they do it for a long term with the city as such. We are doing the same thing with mid-sized cities around waste management and the raising to zero and zero waste. We have more than 260 ongoing innovations at the moment in the city. Most of them run by other cities, and the city is functioning as the enabler. And in this sense, I believe that we would never have been able to do this had we not had a understanding of where we are heading for 2030. So it's to some extent, we are all in agreement that these are the challenges that we need to tackle, and that we need to do it together. So for us, the mission is much broader than only climate neutrality. It's also the mission of an equal school. It's the mission of ensuring, again, us having the largest challenges in the social inequalities of the city. But in the green transformation and the digital transformation, the social inequalities are also very, very important to stress and address. To read more about our work there and in a year, and I would love to be an arena for many of the actors that work on this. In a year, we are organizing what we hope will be a million event, which is called the H22 City Expo. We will showcase the innovations that we bring to the table. We're more than happy to showcase the innovations that you guys are working on. Challenge us.
Thank you so much, Osa. Extremely interesting insights, and thank you for the call that is extended. Feel free, and I see you've already put the website on the chat, and I hope it will trigger interest. Thank you very much. Let me now turn back to you, Kirsten. And we know Germany is a federal country, and we know there is a long tradition of multi-level governance. And actually, you as a metropolitan region, you also cut across 3 different states. And there were a few questions asked earlier in the chat about this cross-border effort, how you make sure that you're doing things at a scale that is actually relevant enough to make change happen. And I'd like to see and to hear from you, how you are dealing with this scale issue in the metro region and how you're aligning your 3 partner states in these efforts to go sustainable.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking myself every day. So actually, yes, it's like always, you have always both sides of the medal, and diversity is always a challenge and an opportunity at the same time. And actually, I always look positive and say there are a lot of opportunities. We just have to tie them all together, and I can just say the same as Asa mentioned already, also in this surrounding this is more than just climate change. We have to deal with several challenges around the world, and just COVID just showed us a little bit more and took away the blanket where the white spots are. But as coming back to your question, we are not only 3 different federal states, we have also different living environments in our region. We have to cope with this urban or rather rural areas. We have just mountains and rivers. If you see behind me, there are some mountains and high tech and crafts, traditional companies, as well as luminous innovation. And we just have to see that our, I would say, secret is maybe our cooperations and close collaborations with all sectors in our region. And we just have to tie them much tighter as we have done before. And also to show what we are doing in different projects already mentioned before COVID and now after COVID. We have to see how we tie them together and not just let them run as silos close to each other. I think there are a lot of opportunities, and we just have to bring them together. And as in our specific region, we have to work on how we can fundings from the federal states so that we can spend them together. Mainly most of you don't know, but if you get money from one federal state, you are not allowed to use them in the other federal states, for instance. So we have to work on that we not just think about single fundings. We have to put them together, because we are strong believer in this 1 and 1 is not just 2, it must be at least 3. So, and then we have step by step working on this. We have now, for instance, just one example, we have a mobility pact where all the 3 federal states work together. Just sign, first of all, the contract, that's it. And now we have to do the work. We have to rethink about the mobility. They changed also after COVID. A lot of people work more from home. We have not that much traffic on the street, but also we have to think about public transportation, rethink public transportation, other ways to do the mobility. And in the region, it's not that easy. Like in the city, you can do cycling, but in the region, it's probably a little bit more difficult, but also you have to rethink a lot of things. And we have to tie them together stronger than before. And just to close it, just not work in silos. We have to bring things together to create much more impact. That is our challenge and our opportunity. And I look forward for that.
Thank you very much.